if you spend any time around software engineers, you'll eventually hear them complain about something called technical debt.
Oh, yeah. Constantly.
Right. It's like, imagine a tech startup and they're racing to launch a new app. The deadline is just looming. The investors are breathing down their necks. So the developers start taking these shortcuts.
They have to just to get it out the door.
Exactly. They write code that works for today, but it's just messy. It's held together by, I don't know, digital duct tape, basically.
Yeah.
And the app launches, the user interface looks gorgeous, and everyone is celebrating.
Not the champagne.
Yeah. But underneath that shiny surface, the foundation is incredibly fragile. They are accumulating this invisible debt. And eventually, like 6 months down the line, a user clicks a basic button and the entire system just violently crashes.
Right, because that underlying structure just couldn't handle the accumulated weight.
Exactly.
It's a deferred consequence. I mean, you get the immediate payoff of speed and production, but you are completely mortgaging the future stability of the system.
Which the user doesn't see.
No, the collapse seems super sudden to the user, but the engineers, they know it was months in the making. They saw the debt piling up.
And today, we are looking at what is basically the biological and psychological equivalent of that technical debt.
It's a fascinating parallel.
It really is. So welcome to the deep dive, everyone. We are digging into a really profound stack of research and literature today on emotional resilience and burnout.
And we're specifically examining the hidden, honestly kind of toxic costs of what our culture praises as sincere devotion.
Yes, sincere devotion. Because the overarching theme of this source material and the mission of our deep dive today is to show that burnout isn't usually the result of hating what you do.
Right. It's not about being lazy.
Not at all. It is almost always the consequence of doing too much of something you deeply care about while just completely ignoring the basic structural limits of your own humanity.
It's a total paradigm shift, honestly, because we have this persistent, almost romanticized myth in our culture that burnout is a symptom of misalignment.
Like if you're burnt out, you must just be in the wrong job.
Exactly. We assume that if you are deeply passionate about your work, and that could be, leading a corporate team, working in healthcare, raising a family, or serving in ministry, we think that passion will somehow act as an infinite fuel source.
Which is wild when you say it out loud.
It is. We view burnout as a failure of commitment. The message is basically, if you're tired, you just need to remember your why. Just push harder.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because that mindset is incredibly toxic when you really think about it. It's like telling that software engineer from the startup, hey, if you just loved coding more, the app would have crashed.
Right, like passion is a substitute for structural integrity.
Exactly. Passion doesn't rewrite the laws of physics, and it certainly doesn't rewrite human biology.
No, it doesn't.
The core argument in the text here is that burnout actually targets the most devoted.
It's the highest performers who go down the hardest.
Yeah, in caregiving, in leadership, the breakdown rarely begins with rebellion or apathy. It begins with faithfulness, but faithfulness without boundaries.
Which is a dangerous combination.
People burn out precisely because they care deeply. They love the mission. But then there's this really insidious shift where they start confusing sacrifice with self-erasure.
They start believing that being constantly needed is the exact same thing as being effective.
And that confusion is heavily, heavily reinforced by the environments we work in, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. There's a concept explored in the sources called sacredized depletion.
Sacredized depletion, wow.
Yeah, it's a brilliant way to describe it. It's how cultures and the texts focus a lot on religious cultures, but this absolutely applies to corporate cultures as well. They reward exhaustion as a badge of honor.
Like it's a virtue to be running on empty.
Exactly. Think about the modern workplace. We praise the manager who is always available on Slack at midnight.
Oh, the midnight timestamp. It's a flex.
It is. We celebrate the founder who sleeps under their desk. We use the language of ultimate dedication to sort of sanctify what is in reality chronic physical and emotional depletion.
The corporate equivalent of this is that terrifying phrase,
Yeah.
we're a family here.
A massive red flag.
Right. When a company says that, what they usually mean is, we expect you to have no boundaries, just like you wouldn't with your actual family.
We're going to call you on a Sunday and expect you to pick up.
Exactly. We dress up labor exploitation, or just really terrible time management, as ultimate loyalty.
And the portrait painted in this research of what that looks like in practice is chilling. It really is. It talks about this massive gap between public fruitfulness and private vitality.
We'll talk about that gap, because that's where the technical debt lives, right?
That's exactly where it lives. You have a leader who is still, hitting all their KPIs.
Yeah.
They are delivering excellent presentations. They are smiling at the door. They are holding the team together.
The visible output remains high. Everyone thinks they're crushing it.
But internally, their inner life is just thinning out. The psychological responsiveness they used to have hardens under the pressure of continual demand. The text puts it so well. It says compassion literally starts to feel expensive.
Compassion feels expensive. I mean, I felt that in my bones when I read it.
It resonates, doesn't it?
It really does. I remember a few years ago, I was managing a project that was just severely under-resourced. And I believed in the project, so I just kept picking up the slack.
Because you cared about it.
Right. I was working weekends, sleeping maybe 4 hours a night. And I noticed one day that a colleague came to my desk looking genuinely distressed about a family issue.
And how did you react?
My immediate visceral internal reaction was just pure annoyance. I just thought, I do not have the bandwidth for your humanity right now.
Wow. Yeah, that's it right there.
I was still doing the job, but I had become incredibly efficient entirely at the cost of being present as a human being.
Well, that's the exact mechanism the researchers talk about. When your cognitive and emotional resources are depleted, your brain shifts into a highly conserved energy state.
Like low battery mode on your phone.
Precisely. Empathy requires a massive amount of cognitive load. You have to perspective take, regulate your own emotions, process complex social cues. It's a lot of work for the brain.
So when you're exhausted, it just shuts that down.
Yeah, when you are running on fumes, your brain simply restricts access to those higher order empathic functions. It says, hey, we literally don't have the calories for this.
So you just become transactional.
You treat people as obstacles to your efficiency rather than human beings.
Okay, but hold on. I need to play devil's advocate here for a second, because this all sounds great in a sterile laboratory setting or a therapy office.
Fair enough, go for it.
But the real world demands output. If I'm trying to get a startup off the ground, or if I'm a single parent, or if I'm leading a nonprofit through a legitimate crisis, relentless output isn't really a choice. It's a requirement.
The demands are very real.
Doesn't the world require a certain amount of self-sacrifice? I guess my question is, how do we actually distinguish between a noble, necessary dedication to a hard task and this sacredized depletion that destroys us?
This raises an important question, and it's a crucial distinction. The difference really lies in the underlying architecture of the effort.
What do you mean by architecture?
Well, noble dedication operates within the reality of human limits. It involves intense effort, absolutely, but followed by necessary recovery.
Like a sprint, then you catch your breath.
Exactly. Sacralized depletion, on the other hand, operates on the delusion that you simply don't have limits.
It's an endless sprint.
It's the belief that you can bypass the need for recovery entirely if your cause is righteous enough or if your willpower is strong enough. And this delusion leads directly to how burnout actually manifests physically.
Because it's never an overnight explosion, is it? It's an erosion.
Right. It's water wearing away a rock over decades.
You don't notice it on a Tuesday, but 10 years later, the entire cliff face just collapses into the ocean.
Precisely. And this is where we really have to get into the physiological mechanisms, because we so often treat burnout as a purely spiritual or psychological crisis.
Like it's a character flaw.
Yeah, we tell people they need a mindset shift or they need to meditate more or read another self-help book. But the reality is that the body keeps the ledger.
The body knows.
It does. When you operate in a state of constant, boundaryless devotion, your amygdala, which is the brain's threat detection center, it perceives that unending demand as a literal physical threat.
It can't tell the difference between a looming tiger and a looming inbox.
It really can't. It just registers danger, so it acts accordingly.
So what happens then physically?
It triggers the HPA axis, flooding your entire system with cortisol and adrenaline. Your heart rate variability drops. Your immune system is suppressed.
Because your body thinks it needs to reserve all energy for immediate survival, like fighting off a predator.
Exactly. This is why the physical signs arrive long before the emotional collapse. Your shoulders are tight because your brain is literally prepping your musculature to fight or flee.
Oh, wow. So it's not just bad posture at the desk.
No, it's a defensive stance.
Yeah.
And you experience insomnia not because you aren't tired, you are exhausted, but because your nervous system is in a state of hyperarousal.
It is actively refusing to let you power down.
Right, because it believes you are sleeping in a hostile environment.
Wow.
It thinks a tiger is outside the cave.
That reframes insomnia so radically for me. It's not your body failing to sleep. It's your body desperately trying to keep you alive based on the false data you're feeding it.
Yes, you are telling your body, we are under attack 24/7, and your body says, copy that, staying awake.
But we completely ignore these small signs, don't we?
We are so good at ignoring them.
We brush off the tight shoulders, the chronic headaches, the shortened temper with our kids. We just chalk it up to, oh, I'm just in a really busy season right now.
And that normalization is the most dangerous phase of the erosion. You adapt to the chronic stress. You start to believe that feeling numb, irritable, and physically terrible is simply what adulthood or leadership feels like.
You just normalize the dysfunction.
You do. And there's a really fascinating historical and cultural case study in the literature that illustrates this profound state of physical and spiritual crash perfectly.
Oh, the Elijah story.
Yes, the story of the prophet Elijah from the Hebrew Bible.
I love this narrative because it is so incredibly raw. Like, for those listening who aren't familiar with the text, Elijah has just experienced the absolute pinnacle of his career.
It's his biggest moment.
He has this massive public showdown on Mount Carmel against hundreds of rival prophets. It's a high-stakes, adrenaline-fueled victory. He stands up to a corrupt empire.
It is the ultimate high-performance, high-stress moment.
But what happens immediately after?
The adrenaline wears off.
Right. And the threat doesn't disappear. The queen basically puts a bounty on his head.
And Elijah completely shatters. He flees into the wilderness, sits down under a solitary broom tree, and he is so thoroughly depleted that he actively asks to die.
He just gives up.
He says, I have had enough. Take my life. He hits the absolute bedrock of his human capacity. He is experiencing profound suicidal burnout.
And the really striking part of this, and I think the text points this out brilliantly, is the response he gets.
It's so counterintuitive to how we handle burnout today.
Because if this were a modern corporate environment, management would put him on a performance improvement plan.
Or send him to a mandatory resilience seminar on a Friday afternoon.
Right. Or if this were modern religious culture, people might question his faith or tell him he just needs to pray harder.
But the response he actually receives is shocking in its gentleness and its absolute pragmatism.
He doesn't get a theology lecture.
He doesn't get a motivational speech about remembering his why. He gets sleep, and he gets food.
It's so basic.
The narrative says a messenger provides him with baked bread and water, and then he goes right back to sleep. He eats, drinks, and sleeps again.
The profundity here is the sequencing, isn't it?
Yes. Physical nourishment completely precedes any spiritual or strategic direction. The physical body is prioritized as the foundational reality of his existence.
It's the ultimate validation of our creatureliness. Like, sometimes the most profound leadership-saving thing you can do is just take a nap and eat a carbohydrate.
Because you are an animal that needs tending.
Which leads to this glaring question for you, the listener, and for us. If the signs of erosion are so physical and the cure is so incredibly basic, like just go to sleep, why do we fight it so hard?
That is the million-dollar question.
Because ignoring a chronic headache requires a certain level of active delusion. You have to constantly convince yourself that you don't need rest like a normal human being. Why do we do that?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, resting requires us to confront our own insignificance.
Ouch.
I know it stings, but the literature identifies the root psychological disease here as the idolatry of indispensability.
The idolatry of indispensability, meaning we worship being needed.
Exactly. When we refuse to rest, when we live as if the entire department or our children's entire future or the success of the whole organization rests squarely on our unending motion, we are essentially acting as if we are the Messiah.
We suffer from a profound illusion of grandeur, but it's masked as self-sacrifice.
It's the perfect disguise for ego.
We think we're Atlas. We walk around with our shoulders hunched, terrified that if we shrug or if we dare to take a Saturday off and not check our email, the entire globe is going to shatter into a million pieces.
But really, the world is resting on a completely different foundation.
We treat our own souls as mere infrastructure, just roads and bridges to be driven over by the demands of everyone else. But what's fascinating is that this complex, this Atlas complex, it actually serves us, doesn't it?
Absolutely it does. Being indispensable is incredibly intoxicating.
It feels really good to be the one everyone relies on.
It strokes the ego to be the center of the crisis, to be the only one who can put out the fire, because if you stop, you have to face the terrifying reality that the world can actually spin without you.
Your inbox will survive. Your company will survive.
God, or the universe, or whatever you want to call it, does not require your chronic exhaustion to keep reality intact.
But the guilt, I think anyone listening right now who manages people or maybe cares for a sick relative, They are screaming at their phone right now going, but the needs are real.
And they are real.
Right. It's easy for us to philosophize about being Atlas, but when you have 50 unread emails from people who genuinely need your help, or a toddler who is crying, stopping feels deeply selfish. It feels like dereliction of duty.
It feels like you're letting people down.
How do you walk away from legitimate human need without feeling like a monster?
That is the ultimate friction point. And to address it, the sources look at the behavioral patterns of people who navigated immense, crushing demand without succumbing to it.
Who's the prime example here?
The primary example explored in this material is the life of Jesus in the first-century gospel accounts.
Okay, let's look at that.
Because if anyone had a mandate for relentless output, it was him. He was constantly surrounded by desperate, visceral human need. The sick, the grieving, the marginalized, they were literally pressing against him in the streets.
Right. In a culture without modern medicine, a verified healer is going to be mobbed 24/7. The demand for his time would be infinite.
Yet, if you look at the text, specifically passages like Mark chapter 6, you see a very different rhythm than what we celebrate in leadership today.
What does he do?
Jesus regularly and intentionally withdrew to lonely places. He left crowds of sick people behind.
Hold on. He literally just walked away from people who needed healing.
Yes, at one point, he is asleep on a cushion in the back of a boat in the middle of a massive storm while his disciples are absolutely panicking. He did not let human demand dictate his pace.
I really want to sit with that for a second, because the phrase, he left crowds behind, in today's culture of hyper-availability, that is borderline offensive.
It goes against everything we're taught about customer service and leadership.
We're taught that if someone needs you and you have the capacity to help, you must help immediately. It's almost immoral not to. But Jesus walked away from people who were actively asking for him in order to protect his communion with God and his own need for rest.
Because he understood the difference between a calling and the tyranny of the urgent.
The tyranny of the urgent.
Yes. The urgent will always, always demand your immediate depletion. But sustainable impact requires boundaries. He could say no to legitimate needs because his identity wasn't rooted in being the ultimate inexhaustible provider for every single person he met on a Tuesday.
His compass was internal, not driven by the external panic. So to cure this guilt that we all feel, to actually force ourselves to step away from that tyranny of the urgent, we have to adopt a mechanism that culturally normalizes that boundary.
You need a structural rhythm.
And the material introduces what is probably the most countercultural, misunderstood concept in modern life to do this: the Sabbath.
It's a very old concept, but incredibly relevant.
But it's crucial to understand that it's not framed here as just a pleasant day off to catch up on Netflix or mow the lawn.
No, not at all.
It is framed as an aggressive act of rebellion.
It is a theological and socioeconomic protest. And to understand why it's a protest, we have to look at the two distinct rationales given for the Sabbath in the biblical texts.
Okay, lay them out for us.
First, in Genesis, rest is woven into the actual architecture of creation. The narrative says God created the world, and then he rested.
Not because he was tired, presumably.
Right, not because the divine being was exhausted and needed to catch his breath, but to establish a rhythm for the cosmos. Rest wasn't an afterthought or a recovery tactic, it was the climax of the creation process.
It established that completion and delight are just as important as production.
Exactly. And the second rationale is found in Exodus, and this one is entirely about liberation.
Right, because of who the audience is.
Yes. The command to rest is given to a group of people who have just been freed from generations of slavery in Egypt. They had been entirely defined by what the text calls the Pharaoh economy.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's dig into that phrase, the Pharaoh economy, because it is the perfect diagnosis for the modern world. How does it operate?
The Pharaoh economy is an empire built entirely on endless brick-making. The fundamental logic of this system is simple. Produce more, hit the quota.
And what happens when you hit the quota?
That's the insidious part. The moment you hit the quota, the reward isn't rest or celebration. The reward is a higher quota.
Of course it is.
You are viewed merely as a unit of production. Your inherent worth as a human being is exactly zero. Your transactional worth is based entirely on the volume of bricks you can make today.
You are a tool.
And tools are meant to be used until they break, at which point they are simply replaced.
Wow. If that doesn't describe algorithmic engagement, corporate gig work, and modern hustle culture, I don't know what does.
The parallels are staggering.
We don't make bricks out of mud and straw anymore, but we make them out of emails, code, content, sales calls. You hit your quarterly target. Great. Next quarter, the target is up 15%.
You have a viral post on social media. Great, the algorithm demands 3 more tomorrow, or you disappear into obscurity.
We are operating in the exact same psychological environment of endless, escalating demand.
Exactly. So, when the command to practice Sabbath is given to these former slaves, it is essentially a command to deprogram themselves from the Pharaoh economy.
It's rehab.
It is. Taking a day where you explicitly refuse to produce anything, refuse to optimize your time, refuse to make a single brick. It is a workly act of defiance.
It is a physical declaration that you are not a slave to the system, and your worth is not tied to your output. It's honestly a massive middle finger to the empire of productivity.
That's exactly what it is.
When you shut your laptop on a Friday evening, or whenever you take your rest day, and you say, I am not answering these emails until Monday, you are actively protesting the idea that the company owns your existence. You are asserting your humanity.
But here's the rub, right?
Oh, yeah. We don't actually like it.
It feels terrible at first.
It really does.
Yeah.
You sit on the couch on a Sunday afternoon, and if your inbox isn't at zero and the laundry isn't done, you feel this buzzing anxiety in your chest.
You feel like you haven't earned the right to sit still.
Exactly. Why is resting so stressful?
That anxiety is literally the withdrawal symptom of the Pharaoh economy. You are so addicted to the dopamine of completion and the false security of productivity that stopping feels like a threat to your survival.
We believe rest is a reward for finished work.
But if you wait until the work is finished to rest, you will literally die working. Because the work of being human, of maintaining a life, is never finished.
There's always another email.
Always. Rest is not a reward. It is a prerequisite. It is an act of profound trust. You are stepping off the treadmill and trusting that the universe will not collapse in your absence.
Which brings us to a really uncomfortable reality. Stepping off a treadmill, admitting we need rest, means admitting we are limited.
It means admitting we are weak.
And in the second half of this material, there is a hard pivot into how we conceptualize strength and weakness. It focuses heavily on the writings of the Apostle Paul, specifically a really famous passage in 2 Corinthians where he talks about his thorn in the flesh.
What's fascinating here is how this passage entirely subverts our modern leadership paradigms.
Set the stage for us. Who is Paul in this context?
Well, Paul is a high-performing, intensely driven founder of multiple communities. He is a spiritual giant, a type A personality for sure. But he has this persistent, unnamed affliction, this thorn.
Like a physical illness or a chronic issue.
The text doesn't specify, but it's severe. And he views it as a major impediment to his mission. So he begs God 3 times to remove it. He essentially says, I could be so much more productive and effective for you if you just fix this weakness.
Which is exactly how we all pray.
Right. Just fix this and I'll be great.
We say, just take away this anxiety or take away this chronic fatigue or fix my difficult coworker, and then I can really crush my goals.
But the response he receives introduces what the material calls the strange arithmetic of grace.
The strange arithmetic of grace. I love that phrasing.
God says to him, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness.
Power made perfect in weakness.
Yes. In the world's economy, the Pharaoh economy weakness is a liability. It is a defect to be hidden, managed, or ruthlessly eradicated so you can get back to making bricks.
But in this framework,
In this alternative framework, weakness is reframed as a sanctuary. It is the precise location where divine power or true, durable strength can actually reside, because it completely strips away the illusion of self-sufficiency.
okay, I have to push back here. I have to stop you.
Go ahead.
Because I understand the poetry of this. Power made perfect in weakness. It sounds beautiful. It looks great on a coffee mug.
Sure.
But let's be fiercely realistic for a second. Try telling a Fortune 500 board about the grace of weakness.
Right. They'd laugh you out of the room.
They would eat you alive. Try going into your quarterly performance review and saying, well, I'm really leaning into my inadequacies right now. If I show weakness, I lose my authority. I get passed over for a promotion. People lose confidence in me.
The stakes are real.
How does this concept suggest we actually live this out without just wallowing in self-pity or destroying our careers?
That is the exact fear that drives the toxic image management we see in leadership today. We believe we have to project absolute unbroken invulnerability.
Fake it till you make it.
Exactly. But the literature makes a critical distinction here between self-trust and God trust, or more broadly, between artificial projection and grounded integrity.
So it's not about oversharing.
No, living out this principle doesn't mean you walk into a boardroom and dump all your unprocessed trauma on the table. It doesn't mean incompetence is celebrated or that you stop trying to do good work.
Okay, then what does it mean?
It means the death of the artificial image. It looks like cultivating psychological safety.
Oh, psychological safety. We hear that term a lot now.
We do, but the paradox is that leaders who relentlessly hide their weaknesses become incredibly dangerous to their organizations.
Wow, so?
When you refuse to be known in your limits, you start operating from a place of deep paranoia. You have to control every single outcome to prove you are competent. You manipulate people, you steal credit, you lash out when challenged, all to protect the facade.
Because if one crack shows, the whole dam breaks.
Right. But a leader who is honest about their limits, who can say, hey, I don't have the answer to this, or I'm stretched too thin right now and I need the team to step up, that leader actually becomes exponentially safer to be around.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but you're absolutely right. If I know my boss is willing to admit when they're overwhelmed or when they've made a mistake, I don't have to be terrified of making my own mistakes.
Exactly. It removes the culture of paranoia.
When you admit limitation, you build a culture of truth around you. People trust a leader who is grounded in reality much more than one who is performing this exhausting illusion of invulnerability.
The grace of weakness frees you from the full-time unpaid job of pretending to be perfect.
The exhausting full-time job of pretending to be perfect, I think half the burnout we experience isn't from the actual work.
It's from the performance.
Yes. It's from the massive amount of energy required to make it look like the work is effortless.
Spot on. You become more durable because your foundation is reality, not PR.
So what does this all mean? We've diagnosed the problem. We've looked at the neurobiology of stress, the theology of limits, the historical protest of the Sabbath, and the reality of weakness.
We've covered a lot of ground.
How do we synthesize this into a life that doesn't just survive the modern world, but actually endures? How do we stop the slow erosion, the hollowing out of the tree?
Endurance requires a proactive, rhythmic architecture.
Proactive, not reactive.
Exactly. You cannot wait for an emergency intervention. If you are waiting until you feel completely burnt out to rest, you are already months, maybe years into accumulating that biological technical debt.
You're already crashing.
Yes. You need a life structured around regular, non-negotiable rhythms. Work and rest, output and input, solitude and community. And the material places a massive, unyielding emphasis on the necessity of the right kind of community.
Because isolation is the most combustible terrain for burnout, right?
It absolutely is. When you are isolated, you lose all perspective. The minor setback becomes a complete catastrophe.
The slightly blunt email from your boss feels like a physical assault.
Right. The text argues that leaders, especially, desperately need people in their lives who are entirely unimpressed by their resumes.
Unimpressed friends. I love that.
You need friends who do not care about your title, your net worth, or your follower count. You need people who will bypass the professional small talk and ask piercing, uncomfortable questions.
Like what?
Like, are you actually sleeping? Are you drinking too much? Are you snapping at your spouse? Are you pretending right now?
You need a space where you are not the boss or the provider or the brilliant problem solver. You just get to be a human being.
Yes, a place to take the armor off.
The sources bring up an incredible historical movement here that really solidified this concept for me. The desert fathers and mothers in early Christianity.
Oh, yes. The ascetics who withdrew into the Egyptian desert around the 3rd and 4th centuries.
Our modern assumption is that they went out there because they just hated society, or they were extreme hermits who wanted to suffer.
That's the stereotype.
But the analysis here shifts that entirely. They didn't withdraw out of hatred for the world. They withdrew to maintain their inner coherence against the sheer noise of the Roman Empire.
The empire was all about acquisition, status, and power.
Exactly. They recognized that if they stayed in that environment 2047, their souls would be completely commodified. They needed a physical and mental desert, a space where they were performing for absolutely no one.
It was a strategic withdrawal to preserve their humanity. And the application for us today is profound. We all need our own version of the desert.
Because our empire is just as noisy.
Oh, even noisier. In a hyper-connected world where every single thought is a potential tweet and every hobby is a potential side hustle, we desperately need spaces where we are not producing content or managing an image.
So what are the concrete practices that build that desert? Because, I can't move to a cave in Egypt tomorrow.
Well, it starts with establishing a Sabbath practice before you are exhausted, Pick a 24-hour window where you explicitly do not engage in the Pharaoh economy.
No emails, no optimizing, no producing.
Right. Secondly, it requires learning to say no as a strategic act of love.
Say more about that. No as an act of love.
If you say yes to every single demand out of a desire to be helpful or to be liked, your yes eventually becomes completely worthless because you have no energy left to back it up.
You're writing checks your body can't cash.
Exactly. A boundary is not a barrier to keep people out. It is a perimeter to protect the vitality of what you actually have to offer.
That's a huge reframe.
And finally, it means engaging with sources of nourishment, whether that's reading scripture, walking in nature, enjoying art, or prayer, purely for your own soul care, and never, ever mining it for material to give to others.
You have to eat food that you aren't immediately regurgitating for an audience.
Exactly.
So let's pull all these threads together. We've covered immense ground today on this deep dive.
We really have.
We started by dismantling the myth that burnout is for the lazy, realizing instead that sincere devotion, when unchecked by boundaries, creates a toxic biological and spiritual debt.
It targets the devoted.
We explored how our bodies keep the ledger and how chronic stress physically rewires us for hyperarousal. We looked at the radical nature of the Sabbath, how taking a day off is actually a defiant protest against an economic system that wants to consume us.
The Pharaoh economy.
And we learned that true durability comes not from hiding our limits, but from leaning into the grace of our own weakness and relying on a community that keeps us grounded in reality.
It is a comprehensive rejection of the cultural narrative that you are a machine designed for infinite output. It is ultimately an invitation back to your own humanity.
And to you, listening to this right now, please hear this. You are not a machine. Your value in this world is not determined by your unceasing availability.
You are allowed to stop.
Rest is not a reward you have to earn by clearing your inbox. It is a biological and spiritual prerequisite for a sustainable life. Stop letting the Pharaoh economy dictate your worth.
It's a hard shift to make, but it's life-saving.
And as we wrap up today, I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought. It's something to chew on while you commute or while you're making dinner tonight.
Lay it on us.
We talked a lot about the fear of stepping back. If our inability to rest is ultimately rooted in the fear that we aren't valuable unless we are constantly producing or constantly being the savior in everyone's crisis, then our exhaustion isn't actually a noble sacrifice for other people.
Wow.
It's just a symptom of our own ego.
That is the mirror we all try to avoid looking into.
It really is.
Yeah.
What would your life look like tomorrow if you truly believe your worth was already secured? What would you finally have the courage to say no to?
That's the question.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We know your time is valuable, and we appreciate you spending it wrestling with these deep truths with us. Keep asking the hard questions, protect your humanity, and we hope you find the courage to step boldly into the radical, defiant practice of rest. We'll catch you next time.